The collective gasp echoed through St. Catherine's Catholic Church as Linda Thompson's foot connected with the base of the beloved Virgin Mary statue. Father Rodriguez dropped his coffee cup, the ceramic shattering against the marble floor as brown liquid spread between the pews where community members had gathered for the monthly interfaith dialogue meeting. Linda stood defiantly, her gray hair pulled back severely, her weathered hands clenched at her sides. The 48-year-old Jehovah's Witness had attended these meetings reluctantly for months, her patience finally snapping during tonight's discussion about religious symbols and their meaning in faith. "You people worship idols," she declared, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "This statue, this graven image, it's exactly what Scripture warns against. You bow down to carved stone instead of worshiping the true God Jehovah." The 23 Catholic families who called St. Catherine's their spiritual home stared in horror. Mrs. Benedetti clutched her rosary beads, tears forming in her eyes as she looked at the statue her late husband had donated in memory of their stillborn daughter 30 years ago. Father Rodriguez, a gentleman in his 60s who had spent 5 years building bridges between the town's different faith communities, struggled to find words. "Linda," he said softly, his Spanish accent thick with emotion, "we can discuss our theological differences without desecrating what others hold sacred." But Linda's anger had been building for weeks, fueled by what she saw as the Catholic community's stubborn adherence to what her Kingdom Hall had taught her were pagan practices. Her own congregation had grown uncomfortable with her participation in these interfaith meetings, warning her about spiritual contamination from false religious practices. Linda stepped back from the statue, expecting to see marble chips scattered across the altar floor, waiting for the satisfying crack of broken stone to validate her righteous anger. Instead, she stared in confusion at the Virgin Mary's serene face, completely unmarked, not even a scuff where her foot had struck with such force. The silence stretched impossibly long until Mrs. Chun, the newest member of the parish, whispered what everyone else was seeing but couldn't believe. "The statue, it's glowing." A warm, golden light emanated from the carved marble, soft but unmistakable in the dim church lighting. The glow pulsed gently, like a heartbeat made visible, casting dancing shadows across the walls lined with stations of the cross. Linda looked down at her right foot, the one that had kicked the statue, and felt something wrong with her shoe. The black leather had split completely down the middle, the sole hanging loose despite the expensive construction she had paid for just last month. Her sock showed through the gaping tear, but her foot felt perfectly fine. "That's impossible," she muttered, bending down to examine the destroyed footwear. She had kicked concrete blocks before during her construction work and never damaged a shoe this badly. Father Rodriguez approached the statue cautiously, his eyes wide with wonder. The sweet fragrance of roses began filling the church, though no flowers bloomed anywhere inside the building this late in October. Several congregation members crossed themselves, their whispered prayers mixing with the impossible scent that grew stronger with each passing moment. Linda's defiance wavered as she inhaled the perfume that seemed to come from the statue itself. Her rational mind searched for explanations while 23 witnesses stared at the undamaged marble figure that continued glowing with inexplicable warmth. By Thursday morning, everyone in Millbrook knew about Tuesday night's incident at St. Catherine's. Linda discovered the town's judgment when she arrived at Patterson's hardware store for her usual supply run and found owner Jim Patterson suddenly too busy with inventory to acknowledge her presence. The Benedetti family canceled their weekly lawn service contract with Thompson Landscaping via a terse voicemail. 3 other Catholic families followed by noon, leaving Linda staring at her appointment book as 40% of her business evaporated in a single morning. Her 18-year-old daughter, Sarah, returned from Millbrook High with tears streaming down her cheeks and grass stains on her jeans. "Some kids corner me by the cafeteria," Sarah sobbed, collapsing onto their kitchen table. "They said you attacked their church and that we're all going to hell anyway. So why don't we just leave town?" Linda's husband, Paul, set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "The other elders at Kingdom Hall want to meet with you this Sunday," he said quietly. Brother Henderson called this morning. They're concerned about the negative attention you've brought to our congregation. Even her closest friend from the witness community, Sister Margaret, had avoided Linda's calls for 2 days. The woman who had studied Scripture with Linda for 15 years was now too uncomfortable to maintain their usual Thursday morning coffee meetings. Linda stood at her kitchen window, watching her Catholic neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, hang laundry across the fence they had once chatted over daily. The woman's deliberate avoidance felt like another kick, this one aimed at Linda's heart rather than marble stone. Her defiance from Tuesday night crumbled into something that felt suspiciously like regret as she counted the cost of her righteous anger. Paul Thompson collapsed while loading mulch bags into their pickup truck Saturday morning, his face gray as concrete as he clutched his chest and gasped for air. Linda screamed for help as her husband of 22 years crumpled between the truck bed and the garage wall. The ambulance ride to Mercy General Hospital passed in a blur of sirens and medical equipment. Dr. Martinez worked frantically over Paul's unconscious form while Linda gripped the metal rail, watching monitors that beeped erratically with her husband's failing heart rhythm. Massive myocardial infarction, the cardiologist explained to Linda in the sterile waiting room. The damage is extensive. We've restored some circulation, but the next 48 hours are critical. His heart muscle is severely compromised. Sarah arrived with red eyes and trembling hands, having driven straight from her weekend job at the local diner. "Mom, is Dad going to die?" she whispered, collapsing into Linda's arms as machines hummed and beeped beyond the ICU doors. Linda had no answer. Paul lay connected to tubes and wires, his breathing assisted by machines that reminded her uncomfortably of the medical equipment they had refused for religious reasons in the past. The irony wasn't lost on her that they now depended entirely on the same medical intervention their faith had once questioned. By Sunday evening, something unexpected began happening in the hospital corridor. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with a small bouquet of roses, followed by Mrs. Benedetti carrying homemade soup. Even Father Rodriguez arrived quietly, asking permission to include Paul in the church's prayer intentions despite everything that had happened just 5 days earlier. By Tuesday morning, Paul's condition had deteriorated despite the cardiologist's best efforts. The machines that had initially stabilized his heart rhythm now struggled to maintain even basic functions. Dr. Martinez spoke in hushed tones about additional blockages and the risks of another surgery on such a damaged heart. Linda exhausted every medical option available. She consulted with specialists in the city, researched experimental treatments online until her eyes burned, and even considered transferring Paul to the university hospital 3 hours away. Each conversation ended the same way. Critical condition, very limited options, prepare for the worst. Sarah had stopped attending classes, instead spending every moment at her father's bedside. She held his unresponsive hand and whispered childhood memories, hoping some part of him could still hear her voice through the medical haze. The Catholic families continued their quiet vigil in the hospital waiting room. Mrs. Chun brought fresh flowers every day, replacing wilted roses with new blooms that filled the corridor with their sweet fragrance. Linda recognized the scent immediately. Remembering that impossible perfume that had filled St. Catherine's the night, she kicked the statue. Father Rodriguez approached Linda carefully on Wednesday evening, his weathered hands folded respectfully. "Mrs. Thompson," he said gently, "I want you to know that our entire parish is praying for Paul's recovery. Would you permit me to offer a blessing for him?" Linda stared at the priest, who had every right to turn away from her family after what she had done. Instead, this man whose sacred space she had violated was offering spiritual support when her own congregation remained awkwardly distant, unsure how to handle the negative publicity her actions had brought to their kingdom hall. Thursday night at 11:47, the monitors screaming in Paul's room jolted Linda from exhausted sleep in a bedside chair. Dr. Martinez and 2 nurses rushed past her as Paul's heart went into dangerous arrhythmia, his body convulsing against the restraints they quickly applied. "We're losing him," the nurse called out as they prepared emergency medication. Linda, You need to step outside now." Sarah grabbed her mother's arm. Both women pushed into the hallway where the Catholic families had maintained their prayer vigil. Mrs. Benedetti immediately wrapped Sarah in her arms while Father Rodriguez placed a gentle hand on Linda's shoulder. Linda found herself staring through the ICU window at her husband's still form. Medical staff working frantically over the man who had loved her through 22 years of marriage, 3 miscarriages, and countless struggles to build their landscaping business from nothing. "I can't lose him," she whispered to no one in particular, tears streaming down her cheeks for the first time since Tuesday's collapse. "He's everything good in my life. He's the only person who never judged me, never made me feel like I had to prove my faith to anyone." The medical team continued their efforts, but Linda could see defeat creeping into their movements. Dr. Martinez emerged with the expression she had dreaded, the one that meant prepare yourself for the worst conversation of your life. Something desperate and unfamiliar stirred in Linda's chest, a surrender she had never experienced before. Her pride, her rigid certainty about religious doctrine, her anger toward Catholic practices, all of it crumbled against the simple reality that she needed help beyond what any human could provide. Linda walked through St. Catherine's unlocked doors at 2 in the morning, her hospital visitor badge still clipped to her wrinkled blouse. The church stood empty and dark except for the eternal flame flickering near the altar where the Virgin Mary statue waited in patient silence. She approached the marble figure she had kicked 8 days earlier, her destroyed shoe now replaced with simple sneakers that felt inadequate for this moment. The statue's serene expression seemed to invite conversation rather than condemnation. "I don't know how to do this," Linda whispered, her voice echoing in the empty sanctuary. "I've spent my whole adult life believing you were just carved stone, an idol that led people away from true worship. But Paul is dying, and I have nowhere else to turn." Her knees hit the cold marble floor without conscious decision. Years of religious training warring against desperate love for her husband. "If you're real, if there's any power in what these people believe about you, please don't let my pride cost Paul his life." The familiar sweet fragrance of roses began filling the air around her, stronger than before, wrapping around her shoulders like a comforting embrace. Linda felt something shift deep in her chest, a wall she had built through decades of rigid doctrine beginning to crumble. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, the words torn from someplace deeper than theology. "I'm sorry for disrespecting what these good people hold sacred. I'm sorry for hurting a community that's showing me more grace than my own congregation. If Paul lives, I'll spend the rest of my life making amends for what I've done." The golden glow returned to the statue, soft and warm, pulsing gently as Linda's phone buzzed with an urgent message from the hospital. Linda's phone displayed Sarah's frantic message. "Mom, come back now, Dad is awake and asking for you." She ran through the empty streets of Millbrook, her heart pounding with hope and disbelief as the rose fragrance seemed to follow her through the night air. She burst into the ICU to find Paul sitting upright. Color returned to his cheeks, speaking coherently with Dr. Martinez, who stood beside the monitors, showing impossibly normal heart rhythms. The medical equipment that had struggled to keep him alive now displayed readings that made the night shift nurses whisper among themselves. "Linda," Paul said weakly, reaching for her hand with strength that hadn't existed 2 hours earlier. "I dreamed about roses, beautiful roses everywhere. And there was this woman in blue who told me it wasn't my time yet, that you needed me here." Dr. Martinez reviewed the charts with visible confusion. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted to Linda quietly. "His cardiac function has improved dramatically. The blockages we identified yesterday appear significantly reduced on the new scans we just completed." Sarah cried tears of joy as she hugged her father, whispering prayers of gratitude she had learned from the Catholic families who had maintained their vigil. Mrs. Benedetti and Father Rodriguez arrived within minutes, somehow knowing that their prayers had been answered. The sweet scent of roses filled Paul's hospital room, though no flowers had been brought during the night hours. Linda looked at Father Rodriguez with new understanding, her transformation complete in ways that surprised even her. "I owe your community an apology," She said simply, "And I owe that statue a debt of gratitude I can never fully repay." Paul's recovery is nothing short of miraculous, and I know where that miracle came from. 2 weeks after Paul's miraculous recovery, Linda stood before the St. Catherine's Parish Council with a detailed proposal for restoring the church's neglected memorial garden. She had spent hours designing a landscaping plan that would honor the families whose loved ones were remembered in the small cemetery behind the sanctuary. "Father Rodriguez," she began, her voice steady despite her nervousness, "my family's landscaping business wants to donate all materials and labor for this project. It's the least we can do after what happened." The council members exchanged glances, still processing this transformation from the woman who had violated their sacred space just 3 weeks earlier. Mrs. Benedetti spoke first, her voice cautious but kind. "Linda, we appreciate the gesture, but this feels like a very large undertaking for one family." "It won't be just our family," Linda replied, unfolding architectural drawings she had created. "I've spoken with members of my Kingdom Hall congregation, and several families want to participate. Brother Henderson thinks interfaith service projects could help heal the divisions my actions created in our community." Sarah had returned to school with her head held high, no longer ashamed of her mother's transformation, but proud of the bridges being built between different faith traditions. She volunteered to coordinate the youth involvement from both congregations, organizing weekend work parties. Paul, still recovering but growing stronger daily, supervised the delivery of rose bushes, memorial stones, and the wooden benches that would provide quiet spaces for reflection. His near-death experience had left him changed too, more aware of the precious nature of community connections and the importance of gracious relationships across religious boundaries. The memorial garden dedication ceremony drew families from 3 different congregations, including the Baptist Church on Elm Street, whose pastor had heard about the remarkable healing taking place in Millbrook. Linda watched as children from different faith traditions played together among the rose bushes, while their parents shared coffee and conversation. Mrs. Martinez approached Linda hesitantly, her teenage son trailing behind with obvious reluctance. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, "my son Carlos has been struggling since he started dating a Catholic girl. Our families are divided over their relationship, and it's causing terrible pain for everyone involved." Linda listened carefully, remembering her own rigid positions just 2 months earlier. She shared her story honestly, including the cost of her pride and the grace she had received through Paul's healing. "Sometimes we think defending our faith means building walls," she explained gently, "but maybe it means building bridges instead." Paul had returned to full health, his cardiologist unable to explain the complete restoration of his heart function. The medical miracle had strengthened his faith and his commitment to supporting Linda's interfaith ministry. He helped establish regular community service projects that brought different congregations together around shared values of compassion and service. Father Rodriguez dedicated a small plaque near the Virgin Mary statue that read simply, "In gratitude for grace received and relationships restored." The memorial garden had become a place where families from different traditions came to pray, reflect, and find common ground in their shared humanity. Linda's landscaping business flourished as Catholic families returned their contracts, joined by new customers who had heard about her transformation and wanted to support a business that exemplified redemption and community healing. David Chun arrived at Millbrook on assignment from the regional newspaper, prepared to debunk what his editor called another small-town religious hysteria story. The investigative journalist had built his reputation exposing fraudulent faith healers and manufactured miracles through methodical research and skeptical analysis. He interviewed Dr. Martinez first, expecting to find medical explanations for Paul Thompson's recovery. Instead, the cardiologist showed him before and after scans that defied rational explanation. The extensive cardiac damage visible in Tuesday's images had virtually disappeared by Thursday's follow-up tests. "This level of healing doesn't occur naturally," Dr. Martinez admitted reluctantly. "I practiced cardiology for 23 years, and I've never documented recovery like this. The medical evidence supports something beyond conventional treatment." Chin interviewed the Catholic families who had witnessed the statue's supernatural protection and the rose fragrance that appeared without any natural source. Each account matched the others with remarkable consistency, despite being given independently. When he entered St. Catherine's to photograph the Virgin Mary statue for his article, the unmistakable scent of roses filled the sanctuary. Chin checked for hidden air fresheners, examined the altar for flower arrangements, and questioned Father Rodriguez about possible explanations. None existed. Linda met with Chin for 3 hours, sharing her transformation honestly and without embellishment. She showed him the split shoe she had kept from that first night, explained her initial hostility toward Catholic practices, and described the desperate prayer that had coincided with Paul's healing. Chun left Millbrook planning to write his usual exposé, but found himself struggling to dismiss evidence that challenged his materialistic worldview. David Chin's article, titled The Miracle of Millbrook, When Faith Transcends Denominational Boundaries, appeared in newspapers across 3 states and sparked responses from families dealing with similar interfaith conflicts. His investigative integrity transformed what could have been a dismissive piece into powerful testimony about unexplainable healing and community restoration. Letters poured into St. Catherine's from readers seeking guidance for their own religious divisions. Linda found herself counseling families by phone, sharing her hard-earned wisdom about pride, grace, and the bridges that love can build across theological differences. The annual interfaith service became a regional event, drawing visitors from surrounding towns who came to see the memorial garden and hear the story of transformation that had begun with an act of desecration and evolved into profound healing. The Virgin Mary statue remained the focal point, no longer a source of division, but a symbol of grace that transcends human understanding. Paul celebrated his first anniversary of recovery by planting additional rose bushes in the memorial garden, each bloom releasing the same sweet fragrance that had marked every miraculous moment of their journey. His medical files remained in Dr. Martinez's office as a testament to healing that medical science could document but never fully explain. Linda's ministry had expanded beyond Millbrook to include speaking engagements at churches and kingdom halls throughout the region, always emphasizing that grace transforms hearts when pride finally surrenders to love. Her message resonated with audiences seeking hope for their own seemingly impossible family reconciliations. Have you witnessed grace transform someone who seemed beyond hope? Share your story of redemption in the comments below, and let others know that healing is possible even in the most divided families.